promised to bless the world through Abraham, and not through Ishmael, but through Isaac, a son that is yet to be born. We'll read about his birth in chapter 21, but it's in the aftermath of that promise that a rather sad, traumatic story takes place in Genesis 18. Again, I really want to hear your questions and your comments, your corrections, whatever I say. Let me try to get through this chapter, and then I want to pause. And don't let me make you forget your comment or your point. Please write it down. Make a note as we're going through, and then we would like to come back to that and hear from you. But in chapter 18, and the Lord appeared unto him, that is unto Abram, in the plains of Mamre. Mamre was that the Amorite fellow that had been a friend to Abraham, and apparently a man of quality. He had helped him in the battle of the kings, you remember. And Abraham sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, and he did lift up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. This gives us a little bit of insight into how Abraham lived. He was a tent dweller. We're going to read about Lot in the next chapter. He's in a house, isn't he? But Abraham living as a Bedouin, wealthy as he was. So he sees these 3 men and shows them the hospitality that would be expected of someone of high quality of character, especially to someone traveling through this more lonely region. And he said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant, and let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort your hearts. After that ye shall pass on. For therefore you're come to your servant. And they said, Do so as thou hast said. And so Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah, and he said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. I think we made this point in passing last time. One source that I checked said that the 3 measures, a measure would be about nearly 11 quarts of meal. You can make a lot of bread with that. Times 3, he said, a morsel of bread. Might have been a bit of an understatement, sort of like when you come home and your mama says, I fixed you a little lunch, you know. So here is this very generous spread for these visitors. But that's not all, not just a meal of bread, is it? He ran, verse 7, to the herd while Sarah is working on the bread. Abraham fetches a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the young men, and hastened to dress it. I guess he could have gotten a goat or some other animal, but he got a calf. And then he took butter, as the old translation says, maybe yours says something like curds, cheese, milk, and the calf that he dressed, and set it before them, and stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. Now, verse 9 talks about the conversation that was had in this setting. They said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door that was behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. And therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord also being old? And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of surety bear a child when I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return unto thee, according to the time of life, Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. He said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. Let me pause there and just make the point. You know, it's hard to say at what point Abraham began to realize these were not just three guys coming through. Because they're described as three men, but they're clearly not just men. In fact, two of them will go on to Sodom in the next chapter, and they are labeled as angels. And you notice something very unique here, because we find that one of them is identified as the Lord. You find long discussions about what that means or how that is so, and there are some who would suggest this is the second person of the Godhead who has come down in some form to speak. Others have said, well, it might be much like the picture at the burning bush, when an angel appeared to Moses, but the voice that spake said, I am the Lord. So the angel of the Lord might speak in the first person as a conduit for the divine voice. I don't know, you can make up your mind which you think fits better, the text and the rest of Scripture. But be that as it may, one of these beings seems clearly to speak in the first person for God, and is identified as the Lord. And so we'll notice that as we continue to go through this story. As we get the scene, these three are here. Two of them will leave, and the one that speaks in the first person for God remains and speaks with Abraham as the chapter continues. So, we were talking about how that when did Abraham realize? You remember what Gideon didn't realize who he was talking to over in Judges 6 at first, but when he saw them disappear to the flame, he thought, well, okay, well, this is not just somebody. This is a being of supernatural quality. And I think that's true here. But maybe one of the obvious signs to that is Sarah laughed. But did she laugh out loud? Pardon?
Didn't have to.
Yeah, but she didn't have to, that's right, because these beings knew what she was thinking. She wasn't before them, she was in the tent, she was hidden away. I'm not even sure. I suppose it could have come up in conversation. It's not recorded. How did they know her name? How did they know this circumstance? How did they know they were desperate for a child? All of this seems to be knowledge that comes from above. So, these are three very special beings that stand before Abraham, and one speaks for the Creator. We've, I think, mentioned this also a bit before. You know, it's easy to say, and Sarah certainly was called down for her laugh here. Didn't Abraham laugh before? Was the laughter of a different nature? Those are questions I'm not sure I can answer. But one thing that I think is more important than that, whether Abraham at first just thought it was too incredible to believe, Sarah seems to have thought that. One thing we know, turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. One thing we know, that both of these people, whatever their initial reaction to this news that seemed beyond possibility, was they came to believe God, and because of that, God indeed worked through them. Hebrews 11:11. I'm sure you've got this passage, maybe a little note in your Bible from over in Genesis. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age. Why? Because she judged him faithful who had promised. Sarah's a great woman. Abraham is a great man. Whatever their missteps might have been, they were quick to correct, and their hearts were true to God. And Sarah was a woman of great faith. She found this incredible, but she got that straightened out quickly. And we're thankful for that and for her. Verse 16. And the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to bring them on the way, and the Lord. There again, we find several times in this chapter, what do you notice about the word Lord there? Capitalized, which means, Yeah, it's giving us a little indication of what the word was in the original. The Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, however you pronounce that. I don't think anybody knows how to pronounce it. We say Jehovah, some say Yahweh, some say, there are a dozen ways in which people have chosen to pronounce that. But it is that special covenant name for God, and it's found several times in this chapter. So you have three men, and yet one of them is identified and speaks for the Lord. And said, let me see, verse 20, yeah. The Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Let me go back. I'm sorry. I need to go back to verse 17. No, I'm sorry. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham this thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, that they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. So it becomes apparent that there's more than one mission here involved in this visit. One mission we've seen, and that is what?
To let Abraham and Sarah know that they would have a child.
Right. Now, Abraham knew he was going to have a child, didn't he? A promise? But he didn't know it was going to be through Sarah. As far as I know, that's the first time that's been announced. But now Sarah will be the one through whom this child will come. And though that seems incredible at first, they both began to believe it, and to believe it with all their heart. So that's part of it. But the Lord makes another reason for this visit. And that is to announce to them, to Abraham, the judgment upon Sodom. Why in the world would Abraham care what happens at Sodom? Lot is there. This nephew that he's brought up almost like a son. They have parted ways back in chapter 13, wasn't it? And after they came out of Egypt. But, God says, I'm going to tell Abraham ahead of time what I'm going to do. And Abraham reacts about like you would expect once you know Abraham. I'll come back to 19 maybe later. But the Lord in verse 20 said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is coming to me, and if not, I will know. Accommodative language, obviously. It's not that the Almighty, all-knowing God doesn't know. I don't think that would be a fair understanding of this. I've always thought of this more in terms of just saying, I'm going to give one more chance. One more chance. They've been a mess. Is the iniquity full? He used that expression, didn't he, over in chapter 14. The iniquity of the Amorites has to be full before I take this land away from them and give it to your descendants. Well, Sodom will answer that question. Is the iniquity full? And we're going to see their answer. You know their answer as we look at the next chapter. But so, verse 22 says, the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom. They were human looking, but again, 19:1, who came to Sodom? Not two men, but not two mere men, I suppose, but two angels in the form of men. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord. Here's that word Jehovah, Yahweh again. Now look at verse 23. The conversation between Yahweh and Abraham here. Abraham drew near and said, please don't destroy my nephew. That's not what he said, is it? It might have been what he felt. But he did not rail against the judgment of God. He pled for God's mercy in a way that was heartfelt but very respectful. Maybe teaching me how to pray a little bit too. Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? It's a rhetorical question. Of course not. Peradventure, there be 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou also destroy and spare not the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? Be it far from thee to do after this manner. to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked. Be that far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? And the Lord said, verse 26, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, I will spare all the place for their sakes. And Abraham answered and said, behold, now I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, which am but dust and ashes. Peradventure there shall lack 5 of 50. Wilt thou destroy all the city for lack of 5? He said, I will not destroy it for 40 and 5. He spake unto him, verse 29 again, said, peradventure there be 40 found there. He said, I will not do it for 40's sake. Verse 30. He said unto him, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Peradventure there shall 30 be found there. He said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, behold, now I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord. Peradventure there shall be found 20 there. He said, I will not do it or destroy it for 20's sake. Verse 32. And he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry. I will speak yet this once. Peradventure 10 be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. And the Lord went his way as soon as he had left communing with Abraham. And Abraham returned to his place. What an extraordinary passage. But the shadow is still coming. The cloud's still coming. The storm is coming to Sodom. And it will be seen what they do. Let me ask you now your questions, your points. Yes, yes, sir.
One thing, I wonder, well, why would Abraham start with 50? If you remember back when they parted ways, Lot had a lot of men with him to tend his flocks and everything else. They had all traveled with Abram, when he was still Abram and his men before they split. So it's not just Lot, it's all people that were with Lot. Have all these guys fallen and become wicked? Is the question, and it seems very obvious that the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Which comes to show, Lot was the one most righteous amongst all of them, and everyone else has fallen to the wickedness of Sodom.
I think that's right. That's true. Yes, sir.
How much time has passed since Lot and Abraham parted ways to this point, would you say?
That's a great question. I would say a number of years have gone by. Probably at least 20 years, I would say. Yeah. And we've seen a lot of changes in his life as well, and Lot's life as well.
It's marking how quickly it happens
Right.
when people turn away from God.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're going to talk a lot about Lot here in just a minute, but that's this sermon has been preached so many times about pitching a tent towards Sodom, but I don't think it's been preached enough. It hadn't been preached too much, I know that. We live in the world, and the influence of the world is so real. We all know it, and we can be changed by it before we know, and our family can be changed by it before we know. Made the point many times, and it's been said by smarter folks than me. Lot was a righteous man. Peter said so. And I rail against and resist the idea of trying to make Lot a villain. He was not a villain. He wasn't also wise in all the decisions he made. I don't think Lot ever compromised his conscience. I don't think Lot ever gave in and said, well, maybe this wickedness is not so bad. I think he always hated it. He vexed his soul from day to day. But he thought, I can handle it. Yeah, but your family can't. And he lost them all. He lost them all. So that's the story of Lot is tragic. And we'll see that again more in 19. I appreciate your point. Somebody else had a point. Yes, sir. Brother Chris, I'm sorry, then Brother Dan.
It's always seemed to me a bold statement, question, this thing that Abraham makes to God, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? And told to come boldly before the throne over in Hebrews 4.
Yeah.
But I think it's an indication that there was a relationship there.
True.
That they could just talk to each other.
Yeah.
I think we need to think about that.
That's a good point. Of course, I think you and I would say now, he's not chiding God here, is he? He's saying, I know, in effect, the God of earth is always going to do right. So wouldn't it be, but there is a freedom of speech here. There is a familiarity here. Not irreverent. I am but dust and ashes. There's always there's a recognized rightful distance. But, Abraham, laid his heart out to God. Isn't that what point's been made again, from great definition or description at least of prayer is Romans 10. My heart's prayer desire before God is that the Jews, his brethren, might be saved. That's what prayer is pouring out our heart's desire to God. And that's what he was doing here. Yeah, good point. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, we all know this, that this decision Lot chose to be in Sodom and Gomorrah was made basically from the lust of the eye. If you remember, he looked and he saw the well-watered plains and things of that nature, and he chose that, didn't he? And then this has brought him to this point. So when we see something that really looks good, we really need to think about it and observe it and make sure we're making the right decision.
No question. And I think, and that's what makes it all the scarier. You say, well, look, I am not a compromiser morally. Neither was Lot. I'm a good guy. Lot was a good guy. You still wind up in a shipwreck. That's the lesson that he teaches me as a father. You can make a mess of things with the best intentions and with a lot of personal strength, but you're not wise and you're not looking at the back door and you don't fear the real power of Satan. You're not holding close enough to God. You're too confident. Yes.
One thing you look at Abraham and you see, to me, this is a greatness of Abraham. God's judgment's going to prevail, but he's calling for mercy. Even in this situation, and I think that's an example for us. We need to have the confidence God's judgment's going to prevail, but we need to do what we can to show as much mercy as we can. To have that kind of spirit, God's going to take care of what needs to be taken care of. What I need to do is, like Abraham, is have that spirit of mercy about me.
Yeah. It's interesting too. Marcus was talking about why did he start at 50. I think it's a sort of fair question. Why did he stop at 10? Maybe we'll talk about that also in the next chapter. I don't know that I know the answer, but there's been an answer suggested. Just a word quickly. Verse 19, is there a greater compliment ever paid to a father than this? I know him, that he will command his children, his household after him, that they will keep the way of the Lord. If that could be said about every father, boy, what a blessing. God said, I know Abraham. I know him. May it be said of us. So, chapter 19. They're going down to Sodom, and again, like the old man said, we're not supposed to preach question marks, we're supposed to preach exclamation points. But sometimes I'm not sure. Generally speaking, the territory we're talking about, those kingdoms of Sodom and Gomorrah and Zeboim and all those, were thought to be at the south end of the Dead Sea. I have read a number of folks who believe that and show their evidence for that. Actually some think it's over here, maybe across Jericho, up in the northeast part. I'll leave that to maybe folks who have a greater knowledge of archaeology, but I've always thought of it being somewhere around probably the southeast side of the Dead Sea. So you can consider that for what it's worth, but that's where we're talking about, I think, this area, somewhere around the Dead Sea, and destruction is coming. Chapter 19, verse 1 begins, and there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, wash your feet, and then rise up early and go on your ways. Sounds a lot like Abraham, doesn't it? Maybe it's where he learned that, you reckon? But they said something surprising. They said, no, we're going to stay in the street all night. Oh, no, don't do that. He pressed them greatly. And he turned, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house. And he made them a feast, and did bake them unleavened bread, and they did eat. Why was Lot in the gate? I don't know why he was in the gate. Does that suggest something of his status? I don't know. Was he just there on a mercy mission? Was that his regular to just look out for unwary strangers coming because he knew how dangerous the town was? I don't know. But anyway, he did a good service here by taking these folks in. He didn't know who they were any more than I think Abraham knew at first who those men were. But he takes them in, and they're ready for bed. And then verse 4. Before they lay down, the men of Sodom, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round about, old and young, all the people from every quarter. There's an emphasis on that, isn't it? Which suggests something to me about the total corruption, the depravity of not just a few, not just some roving gang, but this was the whole population was morally rotten. Can you relate to that? And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out to us that we may know them. Some of the modern translations are rather blunt about it, and they give the interpretation, the correct interpretation there, that really they're talking about sexual relations. They want to have homosexual relations with these men. And Lot goes out at the door unto them and shuts the door after him. You know, there's a lot of blame for what Lot did and said in this context, and I understand that. But one thing you have to say is that he went out there and stood between them and his guests, which involves some risk, and he's going to find out how much risk in a minute. And he said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. It is wickedness what they were intending to do, what they planned to do. And we could take time, and it wouldn't be a waste of time to go back through the old law that'll be given later by Moses and even of the new covenant. It's a strange thing, a phenomenon to me. I guess it shouldn't be surprising, but it is very strange. I can understand people who just say, look, I'm going to live for the flesh and follow whatever twisted lust comes to my mind and just hope there's no judgment. Or I can understand serving God. That makes a lot more sense. But I cannot understand somebody who says, I'm going to live in the grossest immorality and at the same time claim that God's on my side. That is bizarre to me. Homosexual churches. This is very strange. It just shows a level of twisted thinking. I've got something of a conscience that says I still would like to be covered spiritually, but I certainly don't plan to live by the standard of God. We see a good bit of that in our world today. Again, 21st century America, this makes it so much more relatable. When I first became a Christian many moons ago and I began to read stories like this, I would think, how does any society ever get to the point where these people are in charge and threatening everybody else? Well, live a while. And the further you get away from God, the clearer that future comes. Now, verse 8 is certainly a passage that's hard to read. He said, after telling these brethren, do not so wickedly. He did call it wickedness, but then he said, Behold, now I have 2 daughters, which have not known a man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. That sounds horrible. And if he had done that, it would have been horrible. I don't know. I try to keep in mind Peter's statement by the Holy Spirit that Lot was a righteous man. Wasn't a wise man always, for sure, but a righteous man. And so I suspect the best light I can put on this, and there's nothing good about what he said here, but it might have been more in terms of hyperbole. Remember over in, where is it, in chapter 42, I think. In chapter 42, we'll get to this story, I hope, but, here, of course, the brothers have gone down to Egypt for food, and Simeon, on this occasion, of course, Joseph is the one who accuses them of lying, putting them to the test. And Simeon is taken away from them. They have to come back, tell the dad, well, Simeon's gone. And he said, you only get it back if you send Benjamin. And, of course, he says, there's no way I'm sending Benjamin. I already lost Joseph, and now you've lost me Simeon. You want me to give Benjamin away? But as the story goes, Reuben speaks up. This is 42:37. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, slay my 2 sons, if I bring him not to thee. Now that won't win you Father of the Year, will it? But I don't think he really was thinking that was going to happen. I think instead, it was an overstatement. Again, trying to put the best light on an ugly statement. Perhaps what Lot was doing was he was knowing these men weren't interested in his daughters, saying, well, I'll give you anything. I'll give you my daughters. But just you can't, in an effort to try to quell their anger or whatever it might be, their lust. You may have a darker view of Lot, and that you'll have to come to terms with that. But their response in verse 9, they said, stand back. And they said again, this fellow came to sojourn, and will he now be a judge? You can sort of hear there, don't you dare criticize us. Don't you put our wickedness in a bad light. He said, we will deal with you worse than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. Can you relate to that too? Don't you be critical of our wickedness. We don't want to hear it. We'll hurt you if you point out how twisted and perverted we are. But the men, that is, these 2 angels, put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. I think it's funny. Lot's the one who needs protection now. He's been trying to protect them. Now, he's the one who needs to be protected. In verse 11, and they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness. These supernatural beings struck these men with some temporary blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. It did not seem to bring them to repentance, did it? They just are that much more determined to get in and work their wickedness. And that's when, and by the way, that says a lot, doesn't it? I'll go down and see about these people, where they are. And the men said unto Lot, hast thou here any besides son-in-law, sons, daughters, whatsoever, whosoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. I think it's fair to say that they have failed inspection. And this city is under the curse of God to be destroyed. He mentions here son-in-law, sons, daughters. I think if you add all that up, and again, there's been a question through the years, I'm not going to be able to settle that for everybody. How many folks did not have in his family? Well, I know there was Lot and his wife, and there were 2 daughters at home, right? That were virgins. Sons-in-law, does this suggest the idea that there were these betrothed sons-in-law, not yet married? Or was this additional family, sons-in-law, daughters, sons? You add all that up, that's about 10, isn't it? If we see this as talking about different people, if they were all, I can't be sure about that. I just think it's interesting. What did Abraham say? Lord, would you save 10? Would you save the city for 10? But they weren't righteous. Whoever they weren't righteous. It's been pointed out, when you boil it all down, I'm not sure there was more than one that was righteous when they all came out, even those who did. So verse 14, Lot went out and spake to his sons-in-law and to those which had married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place. The Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. You go back over to 17th chapter of Luke, isn't it? Where the Lord said, he compared the destruction of Sodom with judgments that were to come. And he said they were, with the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage till the flood came and took them all away. In, where am I thinking about? Which chapter is that in? Is it 17? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about there. They were, I think, going about their daily business as if it was just going to always be this way. But that was not the case. It caught them unawares, as judgments of God do catch people unawares who are not truly in tune with God, not godly in their thinking. It's 28-29, that's right. In the days of Lot, they ate and they drank and they bought and they sold and they planted and they built until the day that the sky turned dark with the brimstone and the fire fell, and then it was too late. So there were a lot of people who thought it was ridiculous. What are you talking about? I've got a big day planned tomorrow. I've got a new job starting. I've got this new everything. I'm getting married tomorrow. Well, verse 15. And when the morning rose, the angels hastened Lot and said, Rise, take thy wife, and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife and his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto it. And they brought him forth, and they set him without the city. We were talking the other day, and we'll see this again. You know how God is merciful. And even, there's a difference, isn't there? When Abraham was given a hard thing to do, he rose up early in the morning and got it done. But Lot delays. Lot lingers. Lot has to be taken by the hand and led here. But also, you remember this. This doesn't excuse anything. When they talk about destroying the city, there may well be relatives. There certainly were at least some sons-in-law that were there in the city. They weren't going to make it. The servants weren't going to make it. What else wasn't going to make it? Everything. Everything he owns, everything he has, everything he's built, it's all going to be gone. I will save your life. That's what you get. So he says in verse 17, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. Don't look back. Don't hang around here. Get to the mountains. And Lot said, Oh, not so, my Lord. Behold now, thy servant has found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy which thou hast shown unto me in saving my life. I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto. It is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou come thither. Therefore the men called the name of the city Zoar. And the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. And the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the city and that which grew upon the ground. It is a scene difficult to imagine. It is horrific. Verse 26 is a sad note. His wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked south, and he saw the whole plain, and it looked like a furnace, the smoke rising up. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. Let me pause there. We have a minute or two left. Do you have a point? I'm sure there are plenty of them from this chapter. Yes, sir.
I think the thing that makes me think that he had other daughters most there is verse 15 when he says to take your daughters which are here. It seems to me that seems like he had multiple sons-in-laws and multiple daughters, but
Could be.
they wouldn't come with him, and so the angel said, but you notice the other thing in that, you know, the difference between Abraham and Lot here. Abraham hears a command from the Lord and does it without questioning, without doubting.
Right.
Lot here, you know, nobody can measure up to the faith of Abraham, I don't think. I don't think anybody can. But you notice the stark difference in how it is.
Yeah.
Because the angels have to basically push him out of the city to get him going.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't believe that he can get to the mountains, that the Lord would protect him, you know, into the mountains. And then, even though he goes to Zoar and the Lord says, I'll save it for you, then afterwards he doesn't believe that the Lord's going to do that and flee from there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yes, sir.
You know, as you pointed out, as bad as it was what he said about his daughters, I think he thought what the men wanted to do was unthinkable. And you think about Romans chapter 1, verse 27, that points that out, you know, men leading the natural use of the woman. You know, it was almost like what they wanted to do was horrible. And I have one more thing. Lot's wife, you think her looking back, you know, they said don't look back. Was it looking back with a longing, or was it, you know,
Yeah.
something like there was a natural curiosity or stuff going on?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose the language would allow for the fact, if you've been walking in one direction, heard a loud noise behind you. I mean, it's just natural to jump and look. I doubt that's what he's talking about here. Luke 17, in 30, even thus shall it be in the day when the Lord is revealed. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away. And he that's in the field, let him not return back. Why would you be tempted to go back to those places? Something there you plan to retrieve or something you long for. But then he says, remember Lot's wife. So I think that would suggest the idea that it's more than just a reaction. It's more a longing, going back, maybe trying to go back. Yes, sir.
I think back to when Noah instructed to build an ark. He told him to build a certain diameter, a certain wood, and he followed those instructions to the T. Now look at Lot and his daughters and his wife here. They were given specific instructions to do. And his wife, you know, had a moment where she turned back, and I guess we don't know, but
Yeah.
and, you know, we look back, and today we all have the same instructions for all this law as well.
Yeah. All right. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Fine. Well, you know, if you think, yeah. Like I say, I'm not convinced that Lot would have done what he said. I think it may have been more hyperbole. I think if he's a righteous man, as certainly the Holy Spirit identified him as being, I don't think that would have been what he did. I think he might have been speaking in a way to try to diffuse the situation. But that doesn't mean I defend what he said. That was a terrible thing to say or even suggest. And what effect that might have had on the girls, I don't know either. That would be a legitimate question. Thank you so much for your kind attention, your help here. We'll start back in about 10 minutes or so.